It is week 6. 6 is my lucky number. I always love a 6. So I'm here for week 6. This week 6, is all about pleasure while weaving in cyclical alignment and understanding seasons. So I'm buzzing for today's all things seasonal alignment chat. And on Saturday, we're going to land together with a really beautiful journey, and I'm really excited about it. So let's get into it. So, first of all, I really want to talk about money again. I want to revisit that for a second and just come back to what we were talking about and how we can tend to ourselves around those money stories. What I see in this container is about abundance through creativity, through aligning with what our needs are, aligning with our children, and so on and so forth. That's why I invited Anna Maria into the space to talk about human design and how that weaves in. And it was really beautiful to see some stories come up on Instagram sharing how welcomed Anna Maria's chat is around all things human design, and just really just generally welcoming in this journey of what it means to be a mother in today's 2025. We cannot talk about abundance without touching on money. But as I always keep reiterating, I do not focus on money in my space, but I do think it's important to bring it in. I see that the chat around money for me personally, and what I believe is that if we just keep talking about money, we're talking about the 6 figures, whatever it might be for you, we're missing out on the really good bit, like the juicy bit, like the bit that's underneath that around how we receive generally. So it comes back to this acknowledgement that we can start to be stretchy and start to be more elastic with our nervous systems around how we receive and how we receive money. But let's be real about the talk about that. Let's be real about the talk about that in 2025 when we're witnessing what we're witnessing in 2025. Let's be real about that. And so I was really grateful and really honored and privileged to be able to have that really nourishing conversation on Saturday around what it means to you personally, each person in that space, what receiving money looks like to you in that space. Not rejecting money in terms of like having a level of abundance that works for you, but welcoming that in and how that looks for you in your home, in your environment, in your community. And for me, that's what this work is about. It's not just about, well, I because I just can't, I don't have a grasp on that. It's like I want to receive this, but I can't see how that links in with what you're underpinning here. What are you creating here? What does this mean to you? And what do you need to receive on every level, not just financially? But I'd love to do a little invitation. So since we've had that chat and since you've been with it and given yourself time to kind of sit with some of those words and what people were sharing, and I've definitely been reflecting on that over the weekend myself, so I imagine that's come up for you. I'd love to just give you an invitation. Before you begin this week and fully get into it, see what comes up for you around this invitation and where you might be able to, yeah, sort of stretch yourself into this. So, a really beautiful piece of work that I've done for myself repeatedly is stretch my nervous system in terms of my financial receiving ability. And what that looks like is it's inviting in someone to come and work with me in some way, or increasing how much money I need to receive through the work that I do, or it might be asking for something that's owed. Like so many people will be owed money and will not ask for it. In fact, I actually had that conversation with a friend of mine yesterday who was fearing that the client would not work with her moving forward because she needed to ask for the money that it was owed. So we had a talk because it is about how we tend to ourselves, especially when, for example, my friend was already at like maximum capacity of how she could, of her nervous system. She was stretched, she was dealing with a lot, and she was then fearing having to ask for the money that she's owed. And what I see is that if we are not consistently stretching ourselves to um, receive on every level, then to simply ask for the money that we're owed can, and when we're already at max capacity, will probably tip us over the edge because we're already at the edge, and that feels deeply uncomfortable, especially for those who don't ask for what is owed, and then they're tipped over the edge because that's not something that they're used to doing. So how do we get stretchy with it? So I would love to invite you to do something that allows for some level of expansion for this stretching on how you receive financially. Something, anything that comes to you when you think about that. And what we always do when we are stretching ourselves. So, for example, if it's like we talked about this and we were talking about one of the real potent ones, I think for me is within those statements that we spoke to was how do I receive for being me? Because, babe, there are a lot of you doing what you do, probably, yeah? But there's only one of you specifically. So there's only you doing what you do, but there are others doing what you do. So how do we differentiate? And I think about that when I started teaching and back when teachers were still wanting to work as teachers in schools, because it's not like that now. But you used to apply for jobs and there'd be like 100 others. And most of those had just come out of university as well. And so I was level pegging. What was I going to give for me? How did I have to sit with the fact that I was going to get that job over that person who's the same level as me, but they're not me? They're not me. So to receive as you can feel stretchy and can feel overwhelming if we don't fully feel like we've tended to what it means to be us as people, and what we're offering as a person. Especially if there's some level of history of being rejected for being who you are, like, for example, in the home environment, being told that you're too much, and so on and so forth. So, something that you could do for yourself to be you and to receive money, and do it. It could be to send a spicy email to someone where you're like, it's spicy for you because you're asking for a level of financial threshold that you've not moved through before. It could be increasing prices somewhere. It could be putting out a new idea somewhere. It could be creating something new that you know will mean that it will be a certain price point. And so then when you've started to think about it, could you send an email to someone? Could you send snail mail to someone? Could you ask someone in person? Could you just ask for that thing that you're owed? And what we need to be able to acknowledge is that that means we have to expand into doing something. And how do you tend to yourself when you are then contracting back to tend to yourself? How do you tend to yourself? I don't mean being like, oh, okay, I've done that now, pat on the back, whatever it might be. I mean, what practices are you putting into place to then go and tend to yourself? 2 minutes of practice, 5 minutes of practice. Maybe it's landing on the earth and feeling rooted on the earth and feeling the energetic flow of Mother Earth and just being there in that space. Maybe it's making a cup of tea and just sitting and having the sun on your face. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's coming back to one of those glimmers on your nervous system ladder. So that is my invitation. Today it is the full moon and I am recording all things seasonal alignment. Pleasure, creativity, seasonal alignment is where I sit, where I enjoy, and I don't know where you're at on your acknowledgement of seasonal alignment. Some people have gone on a deep dive with their seasons, some people have never been on a deep dive with their seasons. I've done shops for teachers quite a few times in schools and stood there and I've been like group of women, group of older women sometimes, quite often in their crone years. I'm like, who's ever explored their seasons? And some of them look at me like I've just I've just said something that's in a different language, right? Like they've never explored it. And that always blows my mind because I'm like, hasn't everyone done that now? But so I like to just do this PSA that I don't know where you're at with your seasonal alignment. So we're going to just have to acknowledge that you're either going to know this or you're not. So what I really want to acknowledge, first and foremost, is that we're talking about our creativity in our seasons. We're not necessarily talking about art, but art might be for you. But it's also like problem solving. It's around like movement. It's around how we tend to ourselves, how we mother ourselves, how we create the home environment, how we organize ourselves, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that you know that. So what I really want you to notice and begin to notice this week and tune into is where does your creativity feel most aligned? So if you are an organized gal and you love to organize your home, when best does that happen for you in the day? where best do you create something with your children and get out the activities? Where best do you work if you are working in the day? Where best do you get out your writing if you're like writing emails or writing like WhatsApp messages back to friends, whatever it might be? Where are you most alive within that day? And how do you feel sleep is for you? Maybe non-existent. Um, but are you, for example, a nighttime girl where you like to go to bed later and have your evening, but you're not a morning person? Or really deep down, you are a morning person, but you've got into the habit of being the nighttime person because you haven't had much time and space in that day. And I always do this because there's like apps now where you can see where you're best positioned to go to sleep and so on and so forth. But I've learned something as I've now got more sleep. So I realize that this might be like triggering for those who are still surviving on 3 hours a night. But I am an 8 hours a night person. Like without 8 hours, I'm just not who I am as a mother truly authentically. So much compassion needs to be had for ourselves as mothers with little sleep, with toddlers, with children who wake in the night even just because they might have wet the bed, for example, if you're in that stage. So much compassion for you and how you tend to yourself on a deeper level as a result of the exhaustion. Because even just 1 hour less than what you need has a massive detrimental impact on your ability and your capacity. So you are running at a very low capacity, more than likely, if you have less sleep and you have toddlers and you have potential babies. So just really acknowledging that, but just thinking about as they grow and as you have more time and space in your evenings and your mornings, what does it look like for you? Where are you best placed? Where are you best positioned to be creative and get your work done? I always thought I was a nighttime person. I always, because I find it really fascinating, but I always thought I was a nighttime person. I used to like be like, love working. I love just like doing things till 11, sometimes midnight if I really want to. No, I'm not that person. I am not that person. I did that on Saturday night, which I hadn't done for a long time. Sunday was not a good day for me. So I'm not that person. I am a early to bed, early rise person. Maybe it's changed over the years, but for me, that's where I'm at, and that's the season that I'm at. So your season and where you're at for where you are best positioned to be creative will of course adjust. Like mine has adjusted over years. 120% mine has changed dramatically over the years since becoming a mother. So just thinking about that. We're going to talk about the seasonal chart, which I create and share with clients on a one-to-one often. So I'm going to share that. And you may have seen a wheel like this many times, or you may never have seen it. So what I really want to think about is how all the seasons are interlinked and how we move through all the seasons generally. And we're going to be looking at, first and foremost, spring, because spring is linked to the maiden years, and spring will also apply massively to the children, the girls, if any girls, if you have any girls, moving into their maiden years. I find it really fascinating re-watching maiden years play out after having had maiden years. So maiden spring, and then we're going to have a look at what that means in terms of where we're at mirrors. So we're going to look at mirrors predominantly today. So in our spring, when we've just had our bleed, we're moving out of our bleed and we're moving into that spring energy where we're going to allow for gentle movement towards ovulation. And ovulation, when the estrogen is rising, can feel so nourishing, especially when you're not somebody who vibrates well with the progesterone rising and pulling you back into your body. When progesterone is pulling you back down into your body, it can often feel really overwhelming, especially if there is a potential progesterone in deficiency there, then it can often feel like it's like you've gone into this real pull, and sometimes it can feel quite PMSy. So when we don't tend to ourselves fully in our spring, that can often show up in our autumn time, in our progesterone time. So what can often happen is that in our maiden years, I really love the exploration of coming back to our menarche and what our menarche felt for us, our first bleed, and how we were honoured within that. There can be so much within that. I do have a menarche journey which I can send. If anyone is ever interested, just let me know. But the menarche is such a gift of a space to acknowledge and be with, and how you were honored as a maiden, how you were treated as a maiden, how you navigate your creativity as a maiden. And then moving into looking what that means for you now when you think about those maiden springy years is often reflected when you are in your ovulatory time. So do you feel that do you feel that estrogen rise? Do you feel how gorgeous that is and how vibrant that is? Or does spring not feel great for you? Do you feel the spring energy, the Mother Earth spring energy? Or and does that feel a time of joy and new beginnings? Or does it feel overwhelming, like you need to do everything and be everywhere and be everything to everybody? But why would that be? Why do you not just feel the joy of the estrogen rising and the joy of the spring energy if that does come up for you? Really just thinking and reflecting on what the maiden years meant for you. And what you could do is you could have time to be with your maiden and explore what comes up when you think about that term maiden for you, and what comes up when you think about spring for you, and how that really reflects on your monthly and yearly cycle. So, really being with those years can give you something really tangible to reflect on around how you can then tend to yourself as you reach into those mother summer peak years of the like kind of like that time when the estrogen peaks, and you really land into that zone of, well, essentially as nature to make a baby. And so we really are conditioned by nature to really feel that energy, that estrogen energy, that joyous, that sexual, that I'm here, this is who I am, aligning with our truest selves, feeling in our bodies, feeling really aligned. How does it feel? How does that feel? But then also to acknowledge that for some people, especially the day after ovulation, when progesterone starts to rise and there is this conflicting energy within the body, it can start to feel a bit overwhelming for some people. Or sometimes it can feel still like there's that energy, riding that little testosterone hit that you get there, and just really being in that energy. It could be so different for everybody. Where do you sit in that energy? And then what often happens is that people then have to sit with and reflect on how it feels for them to be a mother lover in that summer time. And how do you acknowledge that? When we land into our mothering time, we need to do so gently. Every time we land in a new season, we're doing that gently. We're moving into it gently. And sometimes what it can often feel like, especially landing into motherhood, it can feel like you're dumped into it and you're like free falling sometimes. Some mothers definitely feel that. And some mothers feel like they land into it and they feel like this is their season. This is where they need to be. And what we have to reflect on is, okay, if we're feeling like the overwhelm of that motherhood time, that mother lover time, how were we tended to as a maiden before we got there, right? That's something to consider. Like, do you feel like you have had enough tending as a maiden? Did you get enough mothering from your mother to be able to then mother somebody else and become and evolve into that motherhood? In which case, if you didn't, then you need longer to unfurl into it. And I speak to that on a personal level. I definitely have felt like I couldn't claim the title of motherhood. Um, to create a container around mothering has felt stretchy for me, but only since I have felt like I can land in and claim that title of motherhood, especially because I've aligned my motherhood with how I really, really wanted to against the system that was for me. Then I really felt like I could claim that title. I really claim that energy of mother, and my son will be 9 this year. So really giving ourselves more compassion around like landing in and acknowledging that we're a mother. And I definitely feel at the moment that for me as well, like being the mother lover, The lover part of this, Ali is still unfolding into who he is, and I definitely build walls around my heart to be a true lover that I really want to be. So that's how I did. That's what I was doing with my mothering. I was building walls around my heart because as a maiden, I wasn't tended to enough. So we have to give ourselves this season of compassion wherever we're at, always, because we have to look back and say, ah, yeah, but before that, before this time, I actually still have quite a lot of tending to do here, right? And even if I'm 42 now, I still have a lot of tending to do because it's lifelong when our basic line, our rooted line was not where it needed to be. And then we move eventually into this like mother priestess energy. How do we own who we are in our autumn time? How do we own who we are as our progesterone rises and becomes to that peak time? How do we honor and own that time of just being more inward and more knowing of who we are? Or are we rejecting that time, that autumn time? Are we rejecting the inward pull? Are we still pushing and trying to be all to all with poorer boundaries, maybe? And so we're not actually acknowledging who we are in our autumn time, and we're not really acknowledging who we are as beings that are within our body and need to have more time and space to ourselves. How are we not acknowledging that? I often see people with PMS, and sometimes it's like, they have a label of PMDD from the doctor. Often I see that as a rejection of who they are at the core of being a woman and needing to rest and needing to be and needing to come back into their bodies and needing to be in receive of that progesterone pull and that autumn pull. Because the priestess energy, the mothering energy at this point is the knowing one. It's like the third eye opens. It's like, this is who I am. I can really start to see who I am as a person and what I need. Often you hear of people who have like that midlife crisis. It's like, yeah, they go into that like moment of who the fuck am I? Who the fuck am I now? I'm in this at this zone in this season of my life. Boom, this is who I am, you know? And so that often can be really overwhelming. And if how you honor your autumn is a practice for how you can be in that stage of your life when it comes to tending to yourself, more rest, more boundaries, um, less people pleasing, less good girl vibes, so much less good for us because it gets better. And then on the opposite side here, the mirror of autumn is your spring. The mirror of the priestess mother vibe is your maiden. So again, someone with PMS, PMDD, my question would be, how were your maiden years? How were they for you? What comes up for you around that? Did you feel like you got to express yourself fully? Do you feel like at throat you were able to express yourself and your needs fully? Because if you were not, then what can often happen is that the mirroring of that is that by the time you get round to that autumn, round to that mother priestess, you're fucking fuming. You're not who you are. You're not at the core of it who you want to be because you still aren't aligning with yourself because you were constricted because you were told you couldn't be who you wanted to be in your maiden years, in your spring years. And also, if you were not honoring your spring and you didn't fully honor your winter, and then you're bolting, I always say it's like the horse out of the gates, bolting, 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 moving really, really, really quickly in your spring, there's no way that you have the energy to keep going into your autumn and expect yourself to still be the same level of energy and the same person that you were from your spring all the way through your summer, all the way into your autumn. That sounds fucking exhausting. And it is exhausting. And that's why your body isn't coping and why you're probably dealing with the PMS vibes because you're just fucking tired and you're not aligned with who you are. So that's how the mirrors happen. And then we move into this really beautiful winter time. I like to think of that as the time of really being with, when you start to switch into that like cozier autumn town vibes where you start to honor the darker months and the darker days, and we land into the crone. Fucking love. I really, really, really love a crone energy who just has this vibe. A really good example recently was I sold a bracelet that had loads of charms on it and, would have been cost a fortune over the years. And I always thought it would just be like an heirloom, but obviously I'm selling everything. So heirlooms are going, guys. And I had this woman come into my home to collect the bracelet. And she stood there and she took my hand and she said, you know, you're going to be just fine. And she looked me in the eye and she gave me a story around something that she did for herself and how it was the best decision that she'd ever made for her and her husband. How grateful she was for the bracelet and how grateful she was for being with me. And I cried in front of her. Didn't know who she was. I just stood there and she started crying. And she was like, oh, darling. And then it was just like, oh, I can think about it now and I can feel myself welling up because it's that crone energy. It's that knowing energy. It's that like I'm here in my body and I've been through it and I'm witnessing you and I get it. And there's nothing more. The crone energy where they've gone on a journey and they've unfolded and they've unfurled and they've acknowledged who they are at the core of it. And they're there now with these really beautiful boundaries and they know who they are. And the veil drops. The veil's dropped. The crone years are where the veil drops. And I really, really love seeing that. I love it. I love it. I love seeing the veil dropped and I love that crone energy. And so we can feel the veil dropping when we're dropping into our bleeds. We can feel that. Now, for some of you, you may not have a bleed that's now regular and this cycle might be irregular, in which case follow the moon and really be with the moon and the moon cycle and how that resonates. There's a great book called Red Moon, and you could go away and read that and explore more about the moon and how that interacts with you as another cycle. And that's how the crone energy can then be continued forward if they've now in their menopause and they can be with the moon energy. And so, how does that mirror the summertime? How does the winter, how you honor your winter, then be mirrored in your summertime? So if you're not riding that gorgy, gorgy, gorgy estrogen train and you're feeling overwhelmed and the testosterone feels overwhelming because you're like, oh my God, like I can't be that. And then the progesterone pull, if you're not being with all of that and that feels overwhelming, then it's often because we haven't rested fully in our winter and we will feel it through our cycle. And I know that because I have witnessed myself go through all of this alignment and acknowledge it. And I know when I haven't rested in my winter, and I will acknowledge it in my journal and be like, I know I'm not resting now. And I'm going to feel that and give myself more compassion for that. And I verbalize it to my family and I say, guys, I haven't rested enough in my winter. This is going to have a knock-on effect. And I'm sorry about that. But this is just how it is this month. And when I feel myself get the rage or the frustration and the like, oh, I'm just like, it's sticky. I know that that's because I haven't rested fully in my winter and I haven't really been in that time. And therefore, the rest of the cycle can feel challenging. And I acknowledge that and I give myself compassion and go, yeah, but do you remember, Naomi, when you were in your bleed, you didn't rest? And I don't mean bleed for like if you're only bleeding for a few days and then you only rest for those days. I mean, give yourself the 7 days of acknowledgement of rest, more slow, more compassion, more time. And so I find that what I do is that I try not to work during my period. I don't share on socials during my period in those initial few days. I will share when I'm in my 7 days if I feel I want to, but I don't always do that. And I certainly don't do it on where possible on those initial bleeding days. And then I really allow myself to slowly emerge, like the buds that we are, into the spring rather than the rushing. And I have to actively remind myself of that because if we don't actively remind ourselves of that and we don't actively remind our partners of that and they don't find that awareness, then often we're all over the place and we're not cyclical and we're not acknowledging our cyclical alignment. So then what happens is if there is something that comes up around how your mothers were tending to themselves, then this can be impacted with your own cycle and you can find mirrors from their cycle. So for example, if they were a rejection of their mother time, then you might find yourself struggling with your mother time. If you find that they were rejecting their crone energy and they just hadn't really allowed for that space and time to land into their bodies during their crone energy, then often what can happen is that you will start to feel that during your winter time, and you will feel like you can't honor your winter time and be in that because they didn't honor their winter time and be in that. So how does their narrative kind of reflect your narrative? And not just them, but your grandmother, for example, as well. So that's the basic premise. There's more. Like there's always more that we can go into, but I'm hoping that that gives you something to think about. And what I'd really invite in is, if you haven't already, is to really allow in some time and space to reflect on who you are day by day with either the moon or whether you have a menstrual cycle, and to write down the days and see if there's any days that can be sticky. And then those sticky days become like your red days or your amber days, whatever you want to label it. And then everyone in the family is aware that those days are just not great for you. And then when they're not great for you, what could you reflect on, or what could you be with that would allow for you to tend to yourself in a way that feels nourishing on those days and give yourself more compassion on those days. And when that happens and you start to acknowledge why those days are challenging for you, then those days will become less challenging for you. Also, to just give yourself some journaling time around what's come up from that. Maybe even to give yourself some journaling time around the maiden years for you specifically and what you need. If you want the Menarche journey, please just let me know. So that is essentially the premise of all things cyclical alignment. I just like to plant seeds. I don't know what's going to apply to you, and speaking to multiple people at once, of course. So sometimes when we're having like one-to-one conversation, then you might go, aha, this, and then we can go deeper with that. So hopefully that just gives you a rounded view. The final thing is to say that on Saturday we're going to be landing with a rose journey. Well, I have worked with the rose for years. I do see myself as kind of that like rose priestess energy. I've worked, I've run workshops at festivals that specifically work with the rose and really just give ourselves that time and space to be in that rose time. One of my trainings was specifically with the rose. So I'm a big rose gal, which I rejected for years because my mum was a massive rose person. Like she was really into like buying all the David Austin roses, which, if you know, are like very expensive, very beautiful, very cultured roses in the UK. And often we find that if we have challenges with our mothers, we reject something that they've been through because we don't want to turn out like them, for example, is kind of something that I hear a lot in this space and went through myself. And I've had to go on a journey, especially since she passed, with really deepening into what the rose means to me. And the rose is a really beautiful spiral. So the invitation this week is to be with all things rose on Saturday. So you might have any rose smells or rose quartz or rose colored things, or wear pink, whatever, red, whatever feels welcome to you, or whatever rose color feels welcome to you. And the invitation is to go away this week and buy yourself roses or a rose, whatever feels more resonant. And then we're going to talk about that process of purchasing the roses on Saturday. Sending so much love, and we will be in the WhatsApp group if you need anything. I'm email away.